Although the main focus of my channel is and always will be Fire Emblem, starting last year I decided to incorporate one of the other series that I really like, the Paper Mario franchise. This was my childhood. It was the first RPG series that I ever played, and I don't think I've ever quite gotten out of the nostalgia grip that it has on me. I remember seeing the absolutely brutal commercials for Paper Mario 64 where Bowser was dangling Peach over a paper shredder, and I was convinced that it was going to be the greatest game ever. And when I went into it, it was an RPG, something I'd never encountered before. I was really confused, but kind of intrigued. My 10-year-old brain struggled to understand the mechanics, and since we were using a cartridge we got from Blockbuster Video, there was a save file at the final boss, so my friend Brendan and I just spent most of the time experimenting with that, rather than actually progressing the story in the campaign that we started. Eventually, I did get a copy for myself and played through the campaign like a normal person, and then I got TTYD when it came out, and Super as well, which was a little bit disappointing, but still not Sticker Star or any of those bad games. By the time the franchise had finished its sticker starification, I was deeply absorbed in a different Mario RPG series, that being the Mario & Luigi franchise. I only played up until Bowser's Inside Story in this one as well. Something about the third game in the Mario RPG franchises just hits real hard. But despite both of these series being a part of my childhood, as well as something that I revisited time and time again as an adult, I never actually played the original Super Mario RPG. Well, that's a slight exaggeration. I vaguely remember trying it when I was much younger, shortly after TTYD came out, but I bounced off it for one reason or another, probably because I didn't really understand RPG mechanics, and so I haven't really played it as an adult or beyond the first world or two. I had actually already been planning to rectify this blind spot when the remake was announced, and so I decided to wait until the remake rather than purchase the Virtual Console version. And since it's kind of a fundamental text when it comes to Mario RPGs, and I'm trying to make Mario RPGs a bigger part of my channel, I figured I would give my thoughts on it here on the channel when I finished. As you may have noticed, it is several months after the remake came out, and I still haven't finished. I'm on the final world. I just defeated the lady in the Cloudland, and so I have one star to go. My understanding is there's a couple of bosses before Smithy, and then I kill Smithy and I beat the game, but I am just having a very tough time dragging myself through this game. And that's not because it's hard. Mario RPGs are never hard. That's because it's not very fun. This is not going to be a very positive video. Sorry if you're a huge fan of Super Mario RPG. I will throw you a couple of scraps. Let's talk about the things that I like. I think that the story is delightfully silly. It sort of has the merger of Final Fantasy and Mario RPG. This was made by Square Enix, so it makes sense that it has a more grand scope, and it has some very Final Fantasy aspects. Gino and Mallow in particular, the two OCs who join your party, are nothing like any other Mario character. The closest thing to them in any Mario RPG I would say is Flurry, because she's sort of her own species outside of the Mario species, but even she's grounded in some Mario-esque things. It's weird to say grounded about a fantasy creature, being similar to different sorts of fantasy creatures, but yeah, Mallow and Gino really don't feel like they belong in a Mario game, and I say that as a positive thing. I think it's wonderful. The same for a lot of enemy designs. Most of the enemies are not based on Mario enemies, but they are extremely creative. They feel kind of out of place, and they make it seem like Mario has left the Mushroom Kingdom, which he has. Mushroom Kingdom is just the one town. Toad Town is just a Mushroom Kingdom now, and as we move through the different worlds, we're going to different kingdoms, you know, like Moleville, Monstro Town, and there's different populations that aren't toads, or there might be a few toads, but there's, you know, there's the Frog Lake and stuff, and it's really cool. To me, it kind of feels like in Superstar Saga when you jump the border and go to Bean Bean Kingdom, and how everything is like slightly off and different from the Mushroom Kingdom. It's like that, where we're in different kingdoms, and I like that aspect of it. I like the sort of extraterrestrial enemy in the Smithy gang, and how the scope is something that goes beyond just the Mario conflict, you know, between the polycule of Peach, Bowser, and Mario. I do also like how it begins with a simple Bowser kidnapping Peach story and then jumps into the much wider and wackier plot. That being said, as much as I praise the story of Super Mario RPG, I don't think it's the strongest Mario RPG story. Thousand Year Door, Super Paper Mario, and most of the Mario and Luigi games have stronger stories in my opinion. This is obviously subjective, and I don't think that Super Mario RPG necessarily has a bad story, but considering the story is just about the only positive thing I have to say about the game, the fact that it's not even best in class or close to best in class is, well, it's a little bit depressing. And on the topic of depressing, by far my biggest issue with Super Mario RPG is the combat system. This is unfortunate because most of what you're going to be doing in the game is engaging with the combat system. And it's really lackluster. You really don't have that many options for battle. In most situations, the best course of action is to spam standard attacks, or, in some cases, spam the special attacks that hit the enemy for their elemental weakness. Although this isn't even always correct, because sometimes an enemy can have an elemental weakness, but still take more damage from standard attacks than the elemental attacks. For example, in the early game, jump weak enemies will take like 10 more damage from jump attacks than standard attacks until you unlock the more powerful Super Bounce and Mega Bounce attacks. The same is true for some mid-game and late-game enemies who are weak to things like poison, lightning, and fire. The minuscule damage boost often does not feel worth the trade-off in terms of special points. There are a couple of slightly more complex strategies you can do. Gino can boost an ally's stats, Mallow and Peach have healing, and there's some AoE attacks on various characters, but that's about it. Now, the Mario RPGs are designed for children, so they've never been the most complex things in the world, but they're typically good enough to not have just one or two linear paths to victory. And it is especially egregious to have one or two linear paths to victory with enemies as stat buffed as these. Every single standard enemy and boss feels like a significant damage sponge. It's possible that I wasn't grinding enough, although I did do some grinding in addition to just the mandatory battles and encounters that I ran into randomly. At most courses in the game, I found myself 2 or 3-shotting standard enemies, and against bosses, it took upwards of 15 or 20 minutes of just doing the most mind-numbing combat possible. And that's accounting for the fact that I was actually pretty good at the action command system. For those unfamiliar with the Mario RPGs, the concept of timed hits or action commands is the ability to press a button or do some other sort of input during combat to influence the amount of damage you take or give in any sort of attack. For example, Mario's standard attack is a punch. If he's going to do the punch, you hit A directly before he's going to punch, and he'll do some extra damage if you get it right. On the flip side, if an enemy is attacking you and you hit A right before you get hit, then you are able to prevent some or all damage depending on how close to the correct timing you are. Super Mario RPG Remake is unique in that you can actually prevent all damage with proper timing, which is a fun way to keep the player engaged during the otherwise somewhat monotonous turn-based combat. However, I have 2 major problems with this system. The first is that the timings all feel a little bit off. Guards in particular were really hard to get a handle on, and enemies seemed to play by different rules from each other. This meant that while it was theoretically possible to prevent all damage, I was rarely doing that, instead just reducing the damage taken. The second issue I have is that I lied. You can't actually guard every single attack. There are some attacks that are known as unblockable, which your action commands won't do anything for. You can't time guard them. On its own, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. It introduces some specific super attacks that you need to take other forms of strategy to get around. However, the way the game chooses to implement this is not great. In most instances, I found that the attacks that were considered unblockable were ones that inflicted status on your party members. Of particular annoyance were the ones that had the ability to AoE inflict status on your entire party. There is a late game boss who loved to spam the unguardable AoE everyone goes to sleep, and when this happens, I would just be sitting around for upwards of 2 minutes waiting for my characters to wake up or get killed. I wouldn't even call this difficult so much as it is just frustrating. The only way that you can prepare is to give a piece of equipment that prevents specific types of status to your party members, but there's never any indication as to what status to look out for against specific bosses or even enemy zones. And while there are some statuses that do things like damage over time, the majority of the statuses are glorified you don't get to play moments. Sleep means that you don't get to play your turn. Turned into a mushroom means that you skip your turns and you just heal a little bit of HP every turn. Turned into a scarecrow means that you can use items and special attacks, but that's it. Just some of the more irritating ways to add fake complexity to the combat. Not a system I'm a fan of. However, it's not just the combat that frustrated me. Everything in between it was also irritating. Navigating the world is Mario-esque, so you do some platforming, but the platforming controls are very stiff, and the isometric view makes it very difficult to judge jumps. The result makes navigating the world frustrating, which is disappointing because navigating the world is one of the more fun parts of the Mario & Luigi and Paper Mario games. Using your partner's abilities to solve puzzles, or controlling both bros with A and B button, were some of the more satisfying parts that carried the game in between the semi-simplistic battles that both of these franchises featured. The platforming is broken up by several minigames, but none of them were particularly engaging to me, which is a shame because the game's economy really expects you to repeat the minigames to make money and frog coins. You see, in addition to purchasing healing items like mushrooms and syrup, every party member has weapons and armor that they can equip, and these are kind of necessary to keep upgrading considering just how damage spongy all of the enemies are. As a result, repeating things like the minecart minigame or the River Rush minigame or any number of other rejects from Mario Party is kind of necessary if you want to make the battles take ever so slightly less long. Honestly, these problems all compound on each other. The economy incentivizes playing unfun games because you want to feed into the economy to not have to play the unfun combat for as long as you need. I understand that this is probably going to be disappointing to a lot of people. Super Mario RPG is a beloved game, and I'm sure that there are people who like it for reasons other than just nostalgia. But nothing about it clicked for me, and I feel like I am amongst the target demographic because I am completely sold on the Mario RPG aspect of things. This just isn't a very good iteration of it. It's not as bad as something like Sticker Star, but it is certainly worse than even some of the mediocre entries in the franchise. So, despite the fact that I am inches from the finish line, I've decided that I'm probably not going to revisit Super Mario RPG. Instead, I'm going to be devoting my time to Bug Fables and Born of Bread, two games that present themselves as spiritual successors to the Paper Mario formula. Expect to hear my thoughts on them when I get through them both, but in the meantime, if you're debating whether or not to buy Super Mario RPG, I would actually recommend against it. I just feel like it does not have that much to offer to the modern RPG fan. Instead, check out something like Octopath Traveler or Bravely Default, two series that have really iterated on the RPG formula. Or if you're looking for something more simplistic, Bug Fables and Born of Bread, which I mentioned, both come highly recommended to me. I haven't played them myself, but I trust people who say they're good. And if you're only here for Fire Emblem content, then, well, there's gonna be more Fire Emblem content, during the other days that aren't today. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye!